Hello everyone, and welcome to today's story. This one's a roller coaster, filled with love, betrayal, and the kind of drama that keeps you hooked till the end. Daniel, a devoted family man and architect, finds his world turned upside down when he discovers his wife, Evelyn, has been unfaithful with a charismatic business consultant named Marcus. The betrayal shatters their seemingly perfect life, forcing Daniel to grapple with heartbreak and a cascade of manipulative schemes as Marcus escalates his vendetta against him. The infidelity and Marcus's attempts to ruin Daniel's reputation ignite a storm of tension and conflict, testing loyalties and pushing relationships to their breaking point. As secrets unravel and the stakes rise, the emotional turmoil keeps audiences on edge, questioning trust and morality throughout. Let's dive right into it. It's 2014 in a small, picturesque town nestled between rolling hills and a shimmering lake. This place was the epitome of tranquility, where everybody knew everybody, and secrets didn't stay hidden for long. At the heart of this serene town lived Daniel, a 38-year-old architect known for his humble demeanor and dedication to his craft. Daniel wasn't the flashy type. His idea of luxury was a well-maintained lawn and a sturdy, reliable truck. He had built a life many would envy, a cozy home on a quiet cul-de-sac, a beautiful wife named Evelyn, and two kids, Sophie and Max, who were the center of his universe. Sophie was a spirited 12-year-old with a knack for painting, while Max, at 10, was the inquisitive type, always asking questions that made adults stop and think. Evelyn, Daniel's wife, was a striking woman in her mid-30s. She had an air of sophistication about her, with her perfectly styled hair and a wardrobe that seemed to be plucked straight from a lifestyle magazine. Evelyn was the kind of person who could effortlessly command attention in any room, her laughter a melody that lingered long after she'd left. She managed a boutique in town, a venture that had grown steadily over the years, thanks to her keen eye for fashion and undeniable charisma. On the surface, Daniel and Evelyn seemed like the perfect couple. They had the kind of life that inspired Christmas card envy, a well-balanced blend of love, ambition, and family. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Our story begins on a quiet Monday morning. Daniel was in his workshop, sipping his usual cup of black coffee and poring over blueprints for his latest project. His workshop was his sanctuary, a space filled with sketches, tools, and the faint scent of sawdust. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over his workbench. Evelyn breezed into the room dressed impeccably as always. She leaned against the doorway, watching him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Busy as ever," she said, her tone light but laced with something Daniel couldn't quite place. "Always," he replied with a chuckle, looking up briefly before returning to his work. "I've got a meeting at the boutique," she said casually. "Might run a little late tonight." "Take your time," Daniel replied, his focus still on the blueprints. "I'll handle dinner." It was a typical exchange between them, the kind of routine conversation that defined their lives. But as Evelyn turned to leave, Daniel noticed the faint scent of a new perfume, a detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but would later gnaw at him like a loose thread in an otherwise perfect tapestry. The day unfolded as usual. Daniel dropped the kids off at school, tackled his work, and picked them up in the afternoon. But when Evelyn returned that evening, something felt off. She was unusually distant, her laughter a little too forced, her words carefully measured. Daniel shrugged it off, attributing it to a long day at work. Over the next few weeks, however, those little inconsistencies began to pile up. Evelyn's late nights at the boutique became more frequent. Her phone seemed permanently glued to her hand, and her laughter, once a sound Daniel adored, now felt like a barrier, keeping him at arm's length. Daniel, ever the logical thinker, tried to dismiss his growing unease. He told himself he was overreacting, that his mind was playing tricks on him, but doubt has a way of planting itself, its roots spreading slowly until it's impossible to ignore. One Friday evening, Daniel decided to surprise Evelyn with dinner at her boutique. He wanted to recapture some of the magic they'd lost, to remind her, and himself, of the life they'd built together. The boutique was quiet when he arrived, the lights dimmed except for a warm glow emanating from Evelyn's office. He knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Evelyn was seated at her desk, leaning across the surface toward a man Daniel didn't recognize. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had a confident air that felt almost palpable. Their laughter filled the room, a sound that made Daniel's chest tighten. "Daniel!" Evelyn exclaimed, her voice tinged with surprise, and something else he couldn't quite place. She straightened up, her expression quickly shifting into one of composed politeness. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. He turned to the man who stood up and extended a hand. "I'm Marcus," the man said with a smooth, practiced smile. Daniel shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way Marcus's gaze lingered just a second too long. "Nice to meet you," Daniel said, his tone betraying none of the unease churning within him. Evelyn quickly launched into an explanation about how Marcus was a consultant helping her expand the boutique's online presence. She spoke with a rehearsed ease, her words flowing smoothly like water over polished stones. But Daniel, ever perceptive, noticed the way her hands fidgeted slightly and the way her gaze avoided his. He didn't confront her then. Instead, he played along, sharing in their laughter and making polite conversation. But as they drove home that night, an uncomfortable silence filled the car. Evelyn kept glancing out the window, her fingers drumming lightly on her thigh. Daniel said nothing, his mind racing with thoughts he didn't dare voice. That night, as Evelyn slept soundly beside him, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The doubts that had been simmering quietly now threatened to boil over. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers, something he wasn't ready to lose. And so, the stage was set for a story that would unravel the threads of love, trust, and betrayal, testing the strength of one man's heart and the limits of forgiveness. Welcome back, everyone. Let's dive right back into our story, where things are just starting to get interesting. If you've been enjoying it so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more of these captivating tales your way. Now, where were we? Oh, right. Daniel, lying awake at night, trying to make sense of the creeping unease that had settled in his chest. The weekend passed uneventfully, though Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Evelyn, as always, seemed the picture of poise and charm. She laughed with the kids at dinner, helped Sophie with her art project, and even teased Daniel about his serious face, which she claimed made him look older than he was. But Daniel noticed the little things, the way she kept her phone angled away from him, the fleeting moments of distraction when she thought no one was looking, and the faint tension in her smile whenever he asked about her plans for the week. By Monday, Daniel decided it was time to stop second-guessing himself. He loved Evelyn, but he couldn't ignore the knot in his stomach any longer. That morning, as Evelyn left for work, Daniel gave her a long hug, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but probing. "Of course," she replied, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "Why wouldn't I be?" Daniel hesitated, searching her eyes for something, anything that might give him clarity, but Evelyn's expression was serene, unreadable. He forced a smile and kissed her cheek. "Just checking," he said, stepping back as she grabbed her purse and walked out the door. As the door closed behind her, Daniel let out a heavy sigh. He knew he needed answers, but he wasn't sure how to find them, or if he even wanted to. Later that day, Daniel got an unexpected call from his old friend Paul, a private investigator who had once helped him track down a client's missing blueprints. Paul was sharp, discreet, and most importantly, someone Daniel could trust. "Long time no see," Paul said with a chuckle. "What's new?" Daniel hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I need a favor," he said finally, his voice low. Paul's tone shifted instantly. "What's going on?" "It's complicated," Daniel admitted. "Can we meet for coffee?" The two met that evening at a small cafe on the edge of town. As they sipped their drinks, Daniel explained the situation, careful not to jump to conclusions. Paul listened intently, his expression serious. "Look," Paul said finally, setting down his cup, "I can help you get to the bottom of this, but are you sure you want to know? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." Daniel took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around his mug. "I need to know, Paul," he said quietly, "for my own peace of mind." Paul nodded. "All right, I'll start looking into it, but, Daniel, be prepared for whatever we find. It might not be what you're hoping for." Over the next week, Daniel went about his days as normally as he could. He didn't want to arouse suspicion, so he kept up his usual routine, dropping the kids off at school, working on his projects, and having dinner with the family. Evelyn seemed none the wiser, her demeanor as polished and composed as ever. But inside, Daniel was a storm of nerves. Every time Evelyn left the house, every time her phone buzzed, he found himself wondering. By Friday, Paul called with an update. "I've got something," he said simply. "Meet me at the usual spot." Daniel's heart raced as he pulled into the cafe parking lot. Paul was already waiting at a corner table, a manila envelope sitting in front of him. "You sure you want to do this?" Paul asked, giving him one last chance to back out. Daniel nodded, his throat dry. "I'm sure." Paul slid the envelope across the table. "Take your time," he said, "and remember, no matter what's in there, you're going to be okay." With trembling hands, Daniel opened the envelope. Inside were photos, grainy but unmistakable Evelyn, sitting at a candlelit table with Marcus, the man from her boutique. Another photo showed them walking hand in hand down a quiet street, their faces illuminated by soft streetlights. Daniel stared at the photos, his mind reeling. He felt a rush of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, but above all, a deep sense of loss. This wasn't just about Evelyn's actions. It was about the life they'd built together, the trust he thought they shared. Paul watched him carefully. "I'm sorry, man," he said gently. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. "Thanks, Paul," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As he drove home that night, Daniel's thoughts were a whirlwind. He knew he needed to confront Evelyn, but the thought of doing so filled him with dread. How do you start a conversation like that? How do you untangle years of love and memories in the face of betrayal? That evening, Daniel waited until the kids were in bed before asking Evelyn to sit down with him. She seemed surprised but agreed, her smile fading as she noticed the seriousness in his expression. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone cautious. Daniel took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Evelyn, is there something you need to tell me?" Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of guilt cross her face. But then she composed herself, her expression unreadable once more. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady. "You know what I mean," Daniel said quietly, meeting her gaze. "I know about Marcus." Evelyn's breath hitched, and for a moment the mask slipped, but then she straightened, her jaw tightening. "Daniel, it's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Then tell me what it is," Daniel said, his tone sharper than he intended. Evelyn hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. Marcus is a friend, she said finally. We've been talking, and yes, maybe I crossed a line, but it's not serious. It's just... She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. It's just what, Evelyn? Daniel asked, his voice cracking. It's just different, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've felt so distant from you lately, and Marcus, he made me feel seen. Daniel stared at her, his heart breaking. Seen, he repeated. I've been here, Evelyn. Every single day, for you, for the kids, for us, and you're telling me that wasn't enough? Evelyn's tears spilled over, but she said nothing, her silence louder than any words could have been. Welcome back, everyone. If you thought the last part of our story was intense, hold on to your seats, because we're about to dive into the moments where everything changes. As always, if you're enjoying this, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Now let's get into it. Daniel's confrontation with Evelyn left him reeling. Her admission, if you could even call it that, felt like a dagger to the chest. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the cold realization that the woman he had built his life around had been seeking something or someone beyond him. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Evelyn went about her routine as if nothing had happened, her movements precise and deliberate. Daniel couldn't decide if her composure was admirable or maddening. Daniel spent the day in his workshop, the rhythmic hum of his tools providing a semblance of comfort. But no amount of sanding or drilling could smooth over the splintering cracks in his heart. By mid-afternoon, he decided he couldn't face another evening of strained silence. He texted Paul, asking if they could meet. An hour later, they were sitting in a secluded corner of a local bar. Paul ordered a beer and leaned back in his chair, watching Daniel with concern. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly. "I feel like it," Daniel replied, running a hand through his hair. Paul took a sip of his beer. "What's the plan?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "Part of me wants to fight for her, for us, but another part of me can't get past what she's done." Paul nodded thoughtfully. "It's a tough spot, but you need to figure out what you want before you can decide your next move. Do you want to save this marriage, or are you ready to let it go?" Daniel stared into his glass, the weight of Paul's words pressing down on him. He had always been a man of action, someone who tackled problems head-on. But this was uncharted territory. As the days passed, Daniel found himself oscillating between anger, sadness, and a desperate longing to make things right. Evelyn, meanwhile, seemed to retreat further into herself, her smiles increasingly rare, and her laughter almost non-existent. Then came the breaking point. It was a Wednesday evening, and the family was gathered in the living room. Sophie was showing off her latest painting, a vibrant landscape that captured the golden hues of a sunset. Evelyn praised it enthusiastically, but Daniel noticed the way her gaze kept flickering to her phone. When it buzzed for the third time, Evelyn excused herself, claiming she needed to take a call. Daniel watched her disappear down the hallway, his jaw tightening. "Sophie, Max, why don't you two start getting ready for bed?" he said, his voice steady. "But it's not even 8 yet," Max protested. "I know, but I'll read you an extra chapter tonight, okay?" Max grumbled but obeyed, and Sophie followed with a curious glance at her father. Once the kids were out of earshot, Daniel stood and walked to the hallway. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. "I'll see you tomorrow," she was saying, her tone soft. Daniel cleared his throat, and Evelyn jumped, quickly ending the call. "Who was that?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Just a friend," Evelyn replied, slipping her phone into her pocket. "A friend," Daniel repeated. "Like Marcus?" Evelyn's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then her expression hardened. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said, her voice cold. "Actually, you do," Daniel said, stepping closer. "You owe me that much." Evelyn crossed her arms, her defiance crumbling under Daniel's piercing gaze. "Fine," she said quietly. "It was Marcus." Daniel felt his stomach drop, but he kept his composure. "What's going on between you two?" Evelyn hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "We're just talking." "Talking," Daniel repeated, his voice flat. "About what? How to destroy a marriage?" Evelyn flinched but didn't respond. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I want the truth, Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling. "Do you still love me?" Evelyn looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know," she whispered. Those 3 words shattered Daniel more than anything else she could have said. He nodded slowly, his face a mask of calm even as his heart broke into pieces. "All right," he said quietly. "Then I think we both know what needs to happen." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Daniel, wait." "No," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I can't keep fighting for someone who doesn't even know if they want me. If you need time to figure things out, take it, but don't expect me to wait around forever." That night, Daniel packed a bag and left the house. He stayed at a motel on the outskirts of town, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. He couldn't sleep, his thoughts a relentless loop of memories and regrets. The next morning, he called Paul. "I need your help," he said, his voice heavy. Paul didn't hesitate. "Name it." "I need to protect what's mine," Daniel said. "My kids, my business, my home. I can't let her take everything." Paul's voice was calm but resolute. "You've got it. We'll start by documenting everything. Assets, finances, the works, and we'll get you a lawyer, a good one." Over the next few weeks, Daniel threw himself into preparing for the inevitable. He met with lawyers, sorted through paperwork, and leaned on Paul for support. It was exhausting, both emotionally and physically, but it gave him a sense of purpose, a way to channel his pain into something productive. Meanwhile, Evelyn seemed to spiral. Without Daniel's steady presence, the cracks in her facade became more apparent. She missed important meetings at the boutique, snapped at the kids, and spent long hours locked in her room. One evening, Sophie approached Daniel with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel knelt down and pulled her into a hug. "Mommy's going through a tough time right now," he said gently, "but we're going to be okay, I promise." Despite everything, Daniel remained committed to being there for his kids. He attended Sophie's art show, cheered Max on at his soccer games, and made sure they felt loved and supported. But as the days turned into weeks, Daniel couldn't ignore the growing distance between him and Evelyn. The woman he had once adored now felt like a stranger, a reminder of the life they had lost. Welcome back, everyone. If you thought things were tense before, get ready, because this part of the story takes the drama to an entirely new level. The stakes are higher than ever, and the characters are about to face their biggest challenges yet. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're enjoying this roller coaster ride of emotions. Now, let's jump back in. Daniel's life had become a blur of lawyers, meetings, and sleepless nights. He was doing everything he could to protect his kids and his livelihood, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Every time he saw Evelyn, it was like a fresh wound reopening, a painful reminder of the life they had shared and the betrayal that had brought it all crashing down. But Daniel wasn't the only one struggling. Evelyn's once perfect composure was starting to crack. Her late nights with Marcus had lost their allure, replaced by guilt and regret. The boutique, which had once been her pride and joy, now felt like a weight dragging her down, and the distance between her and her children was becoming impossible to ignore. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Daniel was picking the kids up from school when Sophie hesitated before climbing into the truck. "Dad," she said quietly, her eyes downcast, "can we talk?" "Of course," Daniel replied, his heart sinking at the seriousness in her tone. Once they were on the road, Sophie spoke hesitantly, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I think something's wrong with Mom. She's been crying a lot when she thinks no one's looking, and she keeps talking about how everything's her fault." Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "Did she say anything else?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. Sophie shook her head. "No, but she just seems really sad. I'm worried about her." Daniel's chest tightened. Despite everything Evelyn had done, a part of him still cared for her, still wanted her to be okay, if only for the kids' sake. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Daniel called Evelyn. "I need to talk to you," he said simply. Evelyn sighed. "Daniel, it's late." "This can't wait," he interrupted. "It's about the kids." There was a long pause before Evelyn replied. "Fine, I'll come over." An hour later, Evelyn arrived at Daniel's motel room, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a shadow of the woman he had once known, her confidence replaced by uncertainty. "What's this about?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. Daniel gestured for her to sit. "It's about Sophie and Max. They're worried about you." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Worried about me?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Sophie told me you've been upset. She thinks you're blaming yourself for everything that's happened." Evelyn's shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "Maybe I am," she admitted quietly. For the first time in weeks, Daniel saw a flicker of vulnerability in Evelyn's eyes, a glimpse of the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. He took a deep breath, his voice softening. "Evelyn, I don't know what went wrong between us. I don't know if we can fix it, but I do know one thing. Our kids need us, both of us. And if we're going to get through this, we need to be honest, with them and with ourselves." Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been so caught up in my own mess that I didn't see what it was doing to them, or to you." Their conversation marked the beginning of a fragile truce. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Evelyn worked together to create a sense of stability for Sophie and Max. They attended parent-teacher conferences together, coordinated schedules, and made an effort to communicate without letting their personal issues spill over into family matters. But the tension between them was still palpable, like a storm waiting to break. And break it did, on a night that would change everything. It was a Friday evening, and Daniel had just finished cleaning up after dinner. The kids were upstairs, immersed in their homework, and Evelyn had come over to drop off some papers. As she handed him the stack of documents, their hands brushed briefly, and for a moment they both froze. "Daniel," Evelyn said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." Daniel's heart pounded as he met her gaze. "What is it?" "I ended things with Marcus," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I realized I was chasing something that was never going to make me happy. I hurt you. I hurt the kids, and I hurt myself. I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with emotion. Daniel felt a surge of conflicting feelings, anger, relief, and a flicker of hope he hadn't expected. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why are you telling me this now?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "Because I want to try to fix this us. I don't know if it's possible, but I want to try." Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. Could he forgive her? Could he rebuild the trust that had been shattered, or was it too late? Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a scream. Daniel and Evelyn rushed to the kids' room to find Sophie sitting on the floor, clutching her arm. "I fell off the bed," she said, her voice trembling with pain. Daniel immediately called for an ambulance, and within minutes, they were on their way to the hospital. As they sat in the waiting room, the gravity of the situation hit them both. "Daniel," Evelyn said softly, her voice shaking, "I don't want to lose our family. Please tell me what I can do to make this right." Daniel looked at her, his emotions a tangled mess. He didn't have an answer, not yet. The night at the hospital was a wake-up call for both of them. Sophie's injury wasn't serious, a sprained wrist, but the experience brought their fractured family into sharp focus. They couldn't keep living in limbo, caught between the past and an uncertain future. Over the next few days, Daniel and Evelyn began having honest, painful conversations about their relationship. They talked about the cracks that had formed long before Marcus entered the picture, the ways they had both failed to communicate, and the love they still shared despite everything. Welcome back, everyone. The tension is mounting. The stakes are higher than ever, and the characters are standing on the edge of life-changing decisions. If you're hooked like I am, don't forget to smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. Let's dive into the next chapter. The conversations between Daniel and Evelyn weren't easy. Every word felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of unresolved pain. Daniel's frustration often bubbled to the surface, but Evelyn's vulnerability disarmed him in ways he hadn't expected. "Do you think it's possible?" Evelyn asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. The kids were asleep upstairs, and the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. "Possible to what?" Daniel replied, his voice measured. "To fix this," Evelyn said, her gaze dropping to her hands. "To fix us." Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, Evelyn, what you did. It broke something in me, in us. I'm not sure if it can be repaired." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I understand," she whispered, "but I want to try for Sophie, for Max, for us." Her words hung in the air, a fragile offering that Daniel wasn't ready to accept. Not yet. In the days that followed, Evelyn's actions began to speak louder than her words. She canceled her meetings with Marcus, blocked his number, and threw herself into rebuilding her relationship with the kids. Daniel watched from a distance, his emotions a turbulent mix of hope and skepticism. But just as things seemed to be stabilizing, a new storm rolled in. It started with a phone call Paul had been quietly keeping tabs on Marcus at Daniel's request, ensuring that he stayed out of their lives. But now, Paul's tone was urgent, his words laced with unease. "Daniel, we have a problem," Paul said. "What kind of problem?" Daniel asked, his heart sinking. "Marcus isn't letting go. He's been digging into your finances, trying to find leverage. I think he's planning to make a move." Daniel's stomach churned. He thought he had seen the worst of Marcus, but this new development threatened to upend everything he had worked to protect. "Thanks for the heads up, Paul," Daniel said. "Keep me posted." That evening, Daniel confronted Evelyn. "Did you know Marcus was planning to come after me?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. "No, Daniel, I swear. I had no idea. I haven't spoken to him since I ended things." Daniel searched her face, looking for any hint of deception, but all he saw was genuine fear. "I believe you," he said finally. "But if he thinks he can come after me, he's in for a rude awakening." Daniel's resolve hardened. He wasn't going to let Marcus destroy what was left of his life. With Paul's help, he began gathering evidence of Marcus's interference, building a case to protect himself and his family. Meanwhile, the tension between Daniel and Evelyn continued to simmer. They were trying to work together for the sake of their children, but the wounds of the past were still too fresh to ignore. The tipping point came on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Daniel had taken the kids to the park, leaving Evelyn at home to catch up on work. As he watched Sophie and Max play, his phone buzzed with a text from Paul. "Paul, got something you need to see. Can you meet me?" Daniel's pulse quickened. He rounded up the kids and dropped them off at a neighbor's house before heading to Paul's office. When he arrived, Paul handed him a stack of papers. "These are emails between Marcus and a PI he hired," Paul said grimly. "He's been digging into your personal life, trying to find dirt he can use against you." Daniel scanned the documents, his jaw tightening with every word. This wasn't just a vendetta. Marcus was trying to dismantle everything Daniel had built, piece by piece. "That's not all," Paul continued. "He's also been spreading rumors about you around town. It's subtle, but it's enough to make people start questioning your reputation." Daniel felt a surge of anger unlike anything he had ever experienced. He had tried to handle things diplomatically, to rise above the pettiness. But this was war. That evening, Daniel called Evelyn. "We need to talk," he said simply. Evelyn arrived at his motel room an hour later, her expression wary. "What's going on?" she asked. Daniel handed her the papers. "This is what Marcus has been up to," he said. Evelyn's eyes widened as she read through the documents. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I had no idea." "Do you believe me now?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp. Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Daniel took a deep breath, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I know you didn't," he said, "but now we need to figure out how to stop him." Together they began formulating a plan. Daniel would meet with his lawyer to discuss their legal options, while Evelyn would reach out to her contacts at the boutique to counteract the rumors Marcus was spreading. For the first time in weeks, they felt like a team again, united by a common goal, even if their future as a couple was still uncertain. The climax of their battle came 2 weeks later. Marcus had filed a frivolous lawsuit against Daniel, claiming damages to his reputation and accusing him of harassment. It was a blatant attempt to drain Daniel's resources and force him into submission. But Daniel was ready. With Paul's help, he had gathered enough evidence to not only disprove Marcus's claims, but also expose his unethical behavior. The courtroom was tense as the judge reviewed the evidence. Marcus's confident demeanor began to falter as one damning piece of evidence after another was presented. By the time Paul took the stand to testify about Marcus's activities, it was clear who the real aggressor was. When the judge finally ruled in Daniel's favor, the relief was palpable. Marcus was ordered to pay court costs and a hefty fine for filing a baseless lawsuit. His reputation, once untouchable, was left in tatters. As they left the courthouse, Evelyn turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up for yourself, and for us." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "I did what I had to do," he said simply. The victory in court marked the beginning of a new chapter for Daniel and Evelyn. They weren't magically healed. Their relationship still had scars that might never fully fade, but they were learning to trust each other again, one step at a time. For Daniel, the experience had been a painful but necessary reminder of his own strength. He had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and adversity, and come out the other side with a renewed sense of purpose. And for Evelyn, it was a chance to rebuild not just her relationship with Daniel, but also her sense of self. She had made mistakes, but she was determined to learn from them and become a better person for herself and her family. As they sat together one evening watching Sophie and Max play in the yard, Daniel turned to Evelyn. "Do you think we can make this work?" he asked. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "I think we can," she said, "as long as we're willing to fight for it." Welcome back, everyone. This is where the stakes hit their peak, and the tension is almost unbearable. If you're loving the twists and turns of this story, remember to hit like, comment, and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's dive back in. Even with Marcus out of the picture, the aftermath of his schemes lingered like a bad storm that refused to clear Daniel, and Evelyn were still navigating uncharted waters, both of them trying to piece their lives back together while balancing the fragile truce between them. But as life began to settle into a new normal, a letter arrived that reignited the tension. It was addressed to Evelyn, sent from an anonymous source, and it detailed events that only Marcus could have known. The letter claimed that Daniel had been hiding something that, if true, could unravel the fragile progress they'd made. Evelyn confronted Daniel that evening, holding the letter tightly in her hand. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Daniel frowned, taking the letter from her and scanning its contents. His eyes darkened as he read the accusations. "This is nonsense," he said firmly. "Marcus is clearly behind this. He's just trying to stir the pot because he lost." Evelyn studied him carefully. "Is there any truth to it?" she asked, her voice softer now. Daniel's gaze met hers, and he shook his head. "No, Evelyn, I promise you, I have nothing to hide." Evelyn nodded, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. The letter had planted a seed of suspicion, and no matter how much she wanted to believe Daniel, the shadow of their past struggles loomed large. For the next few days, the tension between them grew. Evelyn tried to push the letter out of her mind, but the words seemed to echo in her thoughts. Meanwhile, Daniel became increasingly frustrated, his patience wearing thin under the weight of Evelyn's unspoken doubts. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Sophie had been talking excitedly about an upcoming school project, but the strained atmosphere in the room dampened her enthusiasm. Finally, Max spoke up. "Why are you guys acting so weird?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Daniel and Evelyn exchanged a glance, guilt flashing across their faces. "We're not acting weird," Evelyn said quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, you are," Max insisted. "You're always tense, and you keep looking at each other like you're mad." Daniel sighed, setting his fork down. "You're right, Max. We've been dealing with some stuff, and we haven't done a great job of keeping it from you and Sophie. I'm sorry." Max nodded, his expression serious. "Can you guys fix it?" Daniel glanced at Evelyn, who looked down at her plate. "We're trying, buddy," Daniel said softly. After dinner, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the porch, the cool evening air doing little to ease the tension between them. "We need to talk," Daniel said finally. Evelyn nodded. "About the letter?" "About everything," Daniel replied. "We can't keep living like this. It's not fair to the kids, or to us." As they talked, the walls between them began to crack. Evelyn admitted that she still struggled with guilt over her actions, and that the letter had dredged up fears she thought she'd buried. "I want to trust you, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking, "but I don't know how to let go of the doubt." Daniel reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Then let me help you," he said. "We've come this far, Evelyn. We owe it to ourselves, and to the kids, to see this through." Their conversation marked a turning point. For the first time in months, they began to confront their issues head-on, no longer skirting around the pain and mistrust that had driven them apart. But just as they started to make progress, a new twist threatened to derail everything. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from Paul. "Daniel, you're not going to believe this," Paul said, his tone urgent. "What now?" Daniel asked, his stomach sinking. "Marcus is back," Paul said grimly, "and he's not alone." Paul explained that Marcus had teamed up with a disgruntled former client of Daniel's, a man who claimed that Daniel had cheated him on a business deal. Together, they were planning to launch a smear campaign to discredit Daniel and force him out of business. Daniel's jaw tightened as he listened. "What's their angle?" he asked. "They're claiming you cut corners on a project and pocketed the extra money," Paul said. "It's all lies, of course, but they're counting on the court of public opinion to do the damage before you can clear your name." Daniel's mind raced. He had spent years building his reputation as a trustworthy, hard-working architect. He couldn't let Marcus and his accomplice destroy that. "We need to get ahead of this," Daniel said firmly. "If they're going public, we'll beat them to the punch." Over the next few days, Daniel and Paul worked tirelessly to gather evidence that disproved the accusations. Evelyn stepped in as well, using her connections at the boutique to rally support from the community. The kids even got involved, creating a heartfelt video about their father's integrity and dedication to his work. When Marcus and his accomplice finally launched their campaign, they were met with a wall of resistance. Daniel held a press conference, presenting the evidence he and Paul had gathered and calling out the lies for what they were. The community rallied behind him, their support drowning out the false accusations. Marcus and his accomplice were left scrambling, their plan unraveling before their eyes. The victory was bittersweet for Daniel. While he had successfully defended his reputation, the ordeal had taken a toll on him and his family. But through it all, he had discovered a newfound strength, a resilience he hadn't known he possessed. And Evelyn. She had finally come to terms with her mistakes, realizing that her actions had almost cost her everything she held dear. As they sat together one evening, watching the sun set over the hills, Daniel turned to Evelyn. "Do you think we can really make it work this time?" he asked. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "I think we already are," she said. "Welcome back, everyone. The story has reached a boiling point, and the climax is just around the corner. If you've been loving the twists and emotional moments so far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating recaps. Trust me, the best is yet to come. Let's dive back in." With Marcus's smear campaign thoroughly dismantled, Daniel could finally breathe a little easier. But the battle had taken its toll, leaving him exhausted and introspective. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to reflect, not on Marcus or the chaos he had caused, but on the deeper fractures in his life. Evelyn had proven her commitment to their family during the ordeal, but trust was a different matter entirely. It lingered between them like an unspoken question, a test neither was sure they would pass. One evening, as the kids were asleep and the house was wrapped in silence, Evelyn approached Daniel. She held a small notebook in her hands, its corners worn and edges frayed. "I've been keeping this," she said softly, handing it to him. "It's everything I've been thinking and feeling since all of this started. I thought it might help." Daniel hesitated before opening the notebook. The pages were filled with Evelyn's handwriting, raw, emotional confessions that chronicled her guilt, her love for him, and her desperate desire to make amends. As he read, Daniel felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. The following weekend, Daniel suggested a family outing, a hike to the same scenic overlook where he and Evelyn had first decided to start a family. It was a place filled with memories, both joyful and bittersweet. Sophie and Max were thrilled at the idea, their excitement a welcome reprieve from the tension that had plagued their home. As the family made their way up the trail, laughter filled the air for the first time in what felt like forever. At the summit, the view was as breathtaking as Daniel remembered. The city stretched out before them, bathed in golden sunlight. "This is where it all started," Daniel said, turning to Evelyn. She smiled, her eyes misty with emotion. "It feels like a lifetime ago." As the kids explored nearby, Daniel and Evelyn sat on a rock, the wind tousling their hair. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, his voice steady, About us, about everything we've been through. Evelyn's gaze dropped to her hands, her expression tense. And? And I think I'm ready to try again, he said. But I need to know that we're both all in, no more half measures, no more doubts. Evelyn looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm all in, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Their decision marked a turning point, but rebuilding their relationship was no easy task. They sought counseling, a step that challenged them to confront their fears and communicate in ways they never had before. The sessions were often difficult, forcing them to confront painful truths about themselves and each other. But through it all, they discovered a newfound respect for one another, a recognition of their shared resilience. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself re-examining his approach to life. The chaos with Marcus and the strain on his marriage had revealed cracks, not only in his relationship, but also in his own sense of identity. For years he had defined himself by his work and his role as a provider, but now he realized that being present, for Evelyn, for Sophie and Max, and for himself, was just as important. As weeks turned into months, the family began to find a new rhythm. Sophie's art flourished, Max excelled in his soccer games, and Daniel and Evelyn discovered moments of joy in the little things. Family dinners, movie nights, and quiet conversations on the porch. But life wasn't without its challenges. Marcus's departure didn't erase the scars he had left behind, and there were still moments when doubt and tension crept back into their lives. One such moment came during a family gathering. Evelyn's mother, a sharp-tongued woman with a knack for digging up old wounds, made an offhand comment about Marcus. "I always thought he was too charming for his own good," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "Evelyn, you must be glad to be rid of him." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and Daniel's jaw tightened. "I think we've had enough of that topic," Daniel said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Evelyn shot him a grateful look, and the tension slowly dissipated. But later that night, as they lay in bed, she turned to him with a troubled expression. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if Marcus hadn't come into our lives?" she asked quietly. Daniel considered her question, his brow furrowing. "I think we would have had to face our issues eventually," he said. "Marcus just forced us to confront them sooner." Evelyn nodded, her gaze distant. "I hate what he did to us, but I'm also grateful for what we've learned because of it." Her words resonated with Daniel, a reminder of the strength they had found in the midst of their struggles. As the anniversary of Marcus's smear campaign approached, Daniel and Evelyn decided to mark the occasion, not as a celebration, but as a testament to their growth. They invited close friends and family to a small gathering at their home, a chance to reflect on the challenges they had overcome and the future they were building together. The evening was filled with laughter, warmth, and heartfelt conversations. As the night wore on, Daniel found himself standing alone on the porch, gazing out at the stars. Evelyn joined him, her hand slipping into his. "We've come a long way," she said softly. "We have," Daniel agreed. Their journey wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time in a long time, they felt a sense of peace. Together, they had weathered the storm, and though the road ahead would still have its twists and turns, they knew they could face it together. Welcome back, everyone. This is the part of the story where the stakes reach their peak. The characters are pushed to their limits, and the final moments before the climax begin to unfold. If you've been hooked so far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating stories. Let's get right back into it. The peaceful months that followed Marcus's defeat were a much-needed reprieve for Daniel and Evelyn, but life had a way of throwing curveballs when they least expected it. Just as they were beginning to rebuild their lives, an unforeseen event shook their fragile balance. It began with a call late one evening. Daniel was working on a project in his workshop when Evelyn answered the phone. Her expression shifted from curiosity to dread as she listened, her knuckles white as she gripped the receiver. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling as she held out the phone. "It's Paul." Daniel took the phone, his heart pounding. "Paul, what's going on?" Paul's tone was grave. "Daniel, Marcus has been arrested. He was caught trying to bribe a city official, and it turns out he's tied to some serious fraud cases. But that's not all. He's trying to drag you into it." Daniel's mind raced. "What how?" "He's claiming you were involved in one of the deals he made," Paul explained. "It's a lie, of course, but the authorities might still want to question you." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Thanks for the heads up, Paul. I'll handle it." Evelyn's face was pale as Daniel hung up. "What did he say?" Daniel explained, his voice steady. Despite the storm brewing inside him, Evelyn looked stricken. "He's trying to ruin you again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He won't succeed," he said firmly. "We've come too far to let him tear us down again." The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal consultations and strategizing. Daniel's lawyer assured him that the claims were baseless, but the thought of being dragged into another battle was exhausting. Meanwhile, Evelyn stepped up in ways Daniel hadn't expected. She reached out to her contacts in the community, rallying support for Daniel and ensuring that the truth about Marcus's schemes was known. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed by Daniel, who found himself looking at her with a renewed sense of admiration. Despite everything, she was fighting for him, for their family, in a way that proved how far she had come. The turning point came during a meeting with the district attorney Daniel had prepared meticulously. Armed with evidence that refuted Marcus's claims, Evelyn sat beside him, her presence a steadying force. As the DA reviewed the documents, her expression softened. "This is compelling," she said. "It's clear you had no involvement in Marcus's activities. We'll make sure your name is cleared." Relief washed over Daniel, but the battle wasn't over yet. Marcus's trial was looming, and the media frenzy surrounding the case threatened to dredge up old wounds. On the day of the trial, Daniel and Evelyn stood outside the courthouse, their hands clasped tightly. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the air was thick with tension. "Are you ready for this?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Daniel nodded. "We've faced worse," he said with a small smile. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his once confident demeanor replaced by a strained expression. As the evidence against him was presented, it became clear that his lies were unraveling. But the most pivotal moment came when Daniel was called to testify. He spoke calmly and confidently, recounting his interactions with Marcus and exposing the truth behind the false accusations. His words were met with nods of agreement from the jury, their skepticism toward Marcus growing with every detail Daniel revealed. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus was found guilty on multiple counts, his schemes laid bare for all to see. As Daniel and Evelyn left the courthouse, a sense of closure settled over them. They had faced the storm together, and they had come out stronger. The weeks that followed were a time of reflection. Daniel found himself reevaluating what truly mattered in his life. The ordeal had tested his resilience, but it had also shown him the strength of his family, the unbreakable bond that had carried them through even the darkest moments. Evelyn, too, had undergone a transformation. She had faced her mistakes head-on, fought for her family, and rediscovered the values that had once defined her. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Evelyn turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" she asked. Daniel smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think about it every day," he said, And I know one thing for sure: whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Their journey wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to embrace the future. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were no longer sources of pain. Instead, they were reminders of the battles they had fought and the strength they had found in each other. As Sophie and Max joined them on the porch, their laughter filling the air, Daniel and Evelyn exchanged a knowing smile. They had weathered the storm, and now they were ready to bask in the light of a new beginning. Welcome back for the final chapter of this incredible journey. This is where it all comes together: the resolutions, the lessons learned, and the moments that bring our story to a satisfying close. If you've enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating stories. Now, let's bring it all home. The days following Marcus's trial were filled with a sense of relief and cautious optimism. For the first time in months, Daniel and Evelyn felt like they could breathe freely again. The shadow that Marcus had cast over their lives had finally lifted, leaving space for healing and renewal. Sophie and Max were the first to notice the change. Their parents seemed lighter, more present, and genuinely happy, a stark contrast to the tension that had consumed their home for so long. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Sophie looked up from her plate with a thoughtful expression. "Are we okay now?" she asked, her voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. Daniel and Evelyn exchanged a glance before Daniel smiled gently. "We're getting there, sweetheart," he said, "and we're going to keep working on it, together." As the weeks turned into months, the family settled into a new rhythm. Daniel poured himself into his work, finding joy in the projects he had once taken for granted. But he also made a conscious effort to prioritize his family, carving out time for soccer games, art shows, and quiet evenings at home. Evelyn, too, underwent a transformation. She stepped away from the boutique for a time, focusing on rebuilding her relationships with Daniel and the kids. Therapy sessions helped her confront her guilt and learn healthier ways to communicate and express her needs. Their relationship wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was stronger, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by a shared commitment to growth. One sunny afternoon, Daniel and Evelyn took Sophie and Max back to the scenic overlook where they had hiked months earlier. This time they brought a picnic and spent the day laughing, reminiscing, and making new memories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel turned to Evelyn with a smile. "I think this is my favorite view," he said softly. Evelyn's eyes sparkled as she leaned into him. "Mine too," she said. The resolution of their family's journey didn't end with grand gestures or dramatic revelations. Instead, it was found in the quiet moments, the shared laughter, the open conversations, and the renewed sense of trust and partnership. One such moment came on the anniversary of their decision to rebuild their lives together. Daniel surprised Evelyn with a simple but heartfelt gesture, a scrapbook filled with photos, mementos, and handwritten notes that chronicled their journey. "I wanted us to remember how far we've come," Daniel said as Evelyn flipped through the pages, her eyes brimming with tears. Evelyn hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never giving up on us." The final months of the year brought new beginnings for the entire family. Sophie was accepted into an advanced art program, her talent recognized by a local gallery. Max's soccer team won their championship, and his confidence soared. Daniel's business flourished, bolstered by the support of the community and his renewed passion for his work. And Evelyn. She returned to the boutique with a fresh perspective, introducing initiatives that reflected her values and her desire to give back to the town that had stood by their family. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Daniel made a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, "and to never forgetting where we've been." so we can appreciate where we're going. Sophie and Max cheered, their laughter filling the room. Evelyn smiled, her heart full as she clinked her glass against Daniel's. "To us," she said softly. The story of Daniel and Evelyn wasn't just about betrayal and redemption. It was about resilience, the power of love, and the importance of facing life's challenges head-on. They had learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing to move forward, together. As they sat together that evening, surrounded by the warmth of their family, Daniel and Evelyn knew that their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to face whatever came next, with open hearts and unwavering determination. The camera pans out, showing the family laughing and talking, their silhouettes illuminated by the glow of the fire. It's a picture of healing and hope, a reminder that even the darkest moments can lead to the brightest days. As the screen fades to black, the narrator's voice returns one final time. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, captivate, and remind us all of the strength we carry within. Until next time, take care and keep believing in second chances.